Well, hello and welcome to a special edition of the Alliance Against Collusion Restraint live series. My name is Guy Stevens. I am the founder of the Alliance Against Collusion Restraint and the executive director here. But I also get to be a podcaster, and when you're a small organization, you get to do whatever you want sometimes. So I get to clean the office. I won't even give you the whole list, but I am excited to be here. We're doing a special episode today of our podcast, and we do special episodes when we have things that are happening that I think are just really important and relevant to the moment in time that we happen to be in, and something that I want to share with you and share with you right now. Because you may not know this, but our podcast is actually booked out almost a year in advance. But sometimes something kind of comes out, and I'm like, "Oh, that's something we should talk about." And one of the things that is often the subject for some of our special episodes are brand new books that come out. And we're going to be talking about a brand new book today from a friend and colleague in Australia, Ben Sacco, and a book called Disruption in Schools. We're going to be meeting Ben, talking about the book in just a few minutes. But I'm excited to have you joining us for this discussion. So thank you for being here. Before we get started, just a couple things. If you're not familiar with the Alliance and who we are and what we do, the Alliance was formed about, 6.5 years ago in 2019. Started really around the issue of restraint and seclusion happening in schools, but it was far broader than that. It was restraint, seclusion, suspension, expulsion, corporal punishment, all the things often done to kids very often in the name of behavior. And our work has kind of grown ever since. We do a lot of work really advocating for positive changes. We believe that the same things you can do to improve outcomes for children in school, for children who are often misunderstood, can also improve outcomes for teachers, for administrators, for paraprofessionals. So we advocate for a certain set of principles, really to try to move into those directions. We advocate for trauma-informed, neuroscience aligned, neurodiversity affirming, relationship driven, and collaborative approaches. So at any rate, be sure to check out our website, and you can learn more about the Alliance and the work that we do. And real quick in that vein, I just have something else that I'll share with you before we get to our main topic here, and really why you're here today. And kind of mentioning our website, encourage you to go to our website, which is endseclusion.org. And we have a lot of information there. We are publishing articles on a regular basis. We've got information about professional development and training, and just really a wealth of information that you can find on the Alliance website. What I was going to point out to you today, though, is that as a very, very small nonprofit, we rely on support from our community. We rely on donations and funding to do this work that we're doing. And want to encourage you, if you're interested in supporting our work, maybe you've been involved for a while and think, hey, this is a great organization. You can do that by going to our website, going to take action, and we've got an option now to join the Alliance. And when you go to join the Alliance, you can find out how you can join. And joining is a matter of, you become a small monthly contributor, anywhere from $5 and up. And that $5 and up helps to fund the work that we're doing and the training that we do and all the work that we do to try to support families. And when you become a contributor, your support is very helpful, and it comes with some benefits as well, like discounts on some of our programs and our book studies and things like that. So encourage you to do that. When we have a lot of people that support our work and they give a few dollars a month, it can really help us to work towards our goals and our mission. One of the other things that I'm doing right now, which is kind of fun, is that if you join, and you can join at just $5 a month to support our work, I'll actually send you a special little prize in the mail, and I'll send it to you personally. One of the things that I'll include with that is one of our stickers, our 5 principles stickers, which you can put on your laptop or whatever you want to. So if you want to get a little special mail from me, join as a member, and we'll send you something. So with that, let's get to why we are really here today. We have a special event. I'm really excited to get to introduce a colleague from Australia that's doing some incredible work, and somebody that I've gotten to know a little bit more recently, and had some conversation with. And it's always great to be able to connect with people kind of all across the world that are doing amazing things. Ben, I'm going to read a little bit of your bio here. You're an educational specialist. Of course, you are the author of this new book that we're excited to talk about today. You have been working with schools, teachers, and principals to tackle a lot of tough issues. And we know well, I mean, whether you're in Australia, whether you're in New Zealand, whether you're in the United States, these are really difficult times. They're difficult times for educators. We're hearing that kind of all over the world. There's issues like teacher burnout and retention and school culture and behavior that have become issues that are really making it difficult. Getting fantastic teachers, retaining teachers, is really critical to building strong systems. And of course, you have a lot of strategies to improve classrooms and deal with some of the really difficult things that educators are facing. But what I love about it is that it's grounded in neuroscience and child development and psychology and understanding trauma, and really can be so incredibly impactful. So you have written a brand new book, and we are here today to talk about the book. So Ben, welcome and thank you for joining me today.
No, it's a pleasure, Guy. Thank you very much.
Absolutely, and my pleasure as well. It was great to it just seems like a few months ago that we had a chance to initially meet, and actually I think through a common colleague, Joe Brummer, who had I think connected us, and you've been involved in doing a trauma informed event in Australia. I could think the biggest event in Australia, if I'm not mistaken, right?
Yeah, it's a trauma-aware education conference every
Gotcha.
2 years,
Okay.
pushed out through Queensland University of Technology. And Joe was a speaker at last year's conference.
Well,
That's how I met Joe.
yeah, and I have to tell you, I actually knew more than one speaker at last year's conference, and I have to tell you, I was a little jealous when I was seeing Joe's pictures, whether it be at the conference or with koala bears or whatever it was. But it looked like a fantastic event, and you've got another one coming up in 2027.
We do, yeah.
Okay.
Dates are announced on the website.
Or 2026 or 2027.
2026, yeah.
Okay, 2026. Gotcha. 2026. Okay.
October 29, 30, and 31st next year, 2026. Joe came with a T-shirt, and that's what that T-shirt had your branding, your not-for-profit mission and vision branding.
Yeah, and I think he had his 5 Principles shirt on, if I'm not mistaken. And I remember when I saw, I've joked with Joe. I'm like, I'm going to give you a shirt to wear everywhere. Joe's been a long time, friend, collaborator, colleague, and does some really amazing work. So it was great to be able to meet you and meet you through Joe and start our conversation. And then, of course, I got to know more about you and your work. And learn that you had an upcoming book. And I think I said, probably not long after we met, like, hey, when the book comes out, we'll have to have you back on to talk about it. So that's what kind of brings us. Yeah. It doesn't seem like it was that long ago, but I guess it's been a few months now. So we're going to dive in and talk about the book. Before I do, though, I want to do something I usually do as we get started here, and just remind people, if you are watching live, and I know there's a number of people watching live right now, if you're watching live, let us know in the chat who you are and where you're from. It's always fun to see who's joining us, where you're joining us from. Ben, we actually have a lot of people that we see almost on a regular basis, kind of week after week. Wow. A lot of names that pop up. We have, I'll kind of, tell people, I'm like, oh, we get people from all over the world. And on cue, somebody from New Zealand or Australia will pop in and say hello. So it's always fun to see where people are joining us from. So if you are watching live, take a second, let us know in the chat who you are and where you're from, and we'll give you a shout out as well as we see you say hello. So let's kind of go forward and talk a little bit about the book. We're going to spend the next hour or so talking about the book, what it is, why you wrote it, the work that you're doing. And look at that. Right away, I have a friend and colleague here from Australia that said hello. So on cue. Yeah. Great to be free this morning. And we're always glad to have you join us as well. So thank you for being here. So at any rate, let's kind of dive in and talk a little bit about the book. It's called Disruption in Schools, Understand Me Before You Mark Me. And before we really dive into the content, I just want to ask you to tell us a little bit more about what led you to writing this, because I always think the story is interesting. The story is probably not that you've just been dying to write a book for all of your life and you just put a pen to paper. There are experiences that probably led to it. So why don't you talk to us a little bit about what led to this book and why you decided to write this book?
Yeah, it wasn't something I woke up wanting to do. You're exactly right. That's how the story goes.
Yeah.
No, I felt compelled to do it, to be honest. My career took me to a place where at this point, 20 years in working in education and not-for-profit organizations and a bit of corporate work, I just realized I had something to say. And I was surrounded by some really fantastic academics that I'd learned around their research into inclusion, into what disability means and learning environments need in terms of catering for the differences in human beings and our precious kids. And I felt compelled at a point in time around 5 to 7 years ago to start putting all my thoughts in a Word document. I mean, that's how that happened. And then I became a father as well to two really beautiful, special young girls. And I realized I'm not just an education person, I'm also a dad. And these two worlds have so many similarities because we're caring for kids and we're trying to shape a world that supports kids' development. And then I realized as I kept writing these pieces of work, whether it's understanding neuroscience and psychology from my experiences working with that profession of wonderful people, or even looking at the trauma-aware education work that I was working across. We'll get into it, I'm sure, but suspensions and expulsions work when I was an officer for the Department of Education here in Victoria, Melbourne, Australia. I realised I had so much mixed perspective, and I decided I need to pull this together off the back of COVID and lockdowns in Victoria, which I'm sure the world knows about, and the Senate inquiry into what we termed disruption in schools, and the data out of OECD that suggested we've got this really big challenge around young people being disruptive in learning environments. And if I'm honest, I didn't buy it. I didn't buy it as a simple, they're just being disruptive. I believed that there's more to this. I started to really want to understand that, and I started to write these things down. And then many years later, it shaped up to be a book that really argues some of the things we'll talk about in this time today. So
right. Yeah, I love how you kind of share the the convergence of being a dad, being a father, your role kind of in education, and how those two things relate together. Myself, I mean, the work that I started with the Alliance started out because I'm a dad. I mean, I left a career I was in for 20 years to begin this organization because of an experience I had with my son, and realizing that the systems that were in place were not working for kids like my son, and the harm it had been caused. But you really do see the world differently, kind of with the experience, and understanding that the relationship of all of this. So I love that you share that. You also talk about kind of the neuroscience piece, and I'd love to hear a little bit more about your entryway into that. I'm a really big believer of when you begin to see human behavior through that lens of the human brain and nervous system, when you begin to move past seeing all behavior as intentional and willful and defiant, and when you begin to see behavior differently, I think everything changes. And it's of course starts with us. I mean, because we, and I'm going to speak for you as well, because I'm pretty sure I'm right here, but I know I didn't grow up learning about my brain and my nervous system and how it affected my behavior. I'm going to guess you didn't either. We often were our behavior was influenced by a lot of probably consequences and punishment and rewards and whatever else it may have been. But we really do have a different understanding today, but it's not widespread. I kind of take for granted now that well, everybody should know this, right? Everybody should know this neuroscience and how it relates to development and behavior. But how did you start your journey? Because I think, in my mind, like the trauma aware and understanding the neuroscience, it's so critical to this work. If you would, I know it's a little off topic of the book per se, but how did you begin that journey kind of into the neuroscience awareness?
By accident, if I'm very transparent here, by accident. When I started my teaching career, I was led to believe that we drive literate and numerate teachings so that young people can be literate and numerate. And I was led by some amazing professionals, in particular when I worked for a director of a regional and director of education, and the work that was being put out in the everyday of his mantra was literate, numerate, and curious. And it was inspiring. I again worked for a really amazing line manager who taught me that no 2 days will be the same with working with young people. And that means we need to understand their stories, understand what motivates them, what drives them. So I went from a classroom teacher, really, I felt really clear about my purpose, teach young people to be literate and numerate. I had no idea that there's curiosity and the desire to create environments where the conditions draw the best out of our young people. And that's really by accident. Then what happened was I started to understand through books and through working with psychologists and social workers in some of the disadvantaged sort of areas of the work I did. Hey, this brain and body stuff, it's really important. Understanding how the brain works to, work through the retrieval process and the memory process of what we today term in Australia explicit teaching, I guess. That's fantastic and that's wonderful and that's a great strategy. But I learned that if the conditions aren't right for safety and for calm and for school classrooms being a protective factor for young people and the teachers, then how good is a lesson in maths when a young person's concerned about what it means to actually arrive at school with what they've just witnessed or the sleepless night they had. And so body and brain science became really part of my 20-year fabric of educational work. And I've never looked back. Yeah.
And looking back now, I mean, thinking back 20 years ago, I mean, you were on an early edge of a lot of this. I mean, granted, some of this information has been out for a while now, but in terms of like bringing it to education, we're getting more momentum now. But I'm still amazed that if you kind of do some research here to try to understand the number of educators that are exposed to things about kind of the brain and the nervous system, and then as educators, the numbers are extremely slim now. But I mean, 20 years ago, you were really out there. I was
open to it. I was open to it, Guy. But I was led by really great mentors. See, that's the difference, I think, and really that's what I argue I'm trying to do now. To go back to the book, the why, to put things in a book that graduate teachers, let's say, or parents that feel they're isolated with the challenges that they're being faced with and met with, to feel they've got a resource of learnings from my last 20 years. Now, it's not everything in there. The book's not a thick book, but it's you do things in additions, obviously.
Sure. Well, and when we were talking ahead of before we actually went live, and that could have been part of the podcast. I think I should just hit the record button right away. But we were talking about how when you finish a book, there may be a year before that book actually goes and is published and is out and available. And you were bringing up such an important point of like, this is a continuing evolution. Like there are ideas that I have now that have actually grown and evolved from the time that I actually put the book out. And even though the book is brand new, it's like, this is a journey. This is not a destination. This is not about reaching this point of knowledge where it's like, I know everything there is to know. It really is driven, go back to that curiosity you mentioned. It's really driven by that continual deep curiosity to want to know better and want to do better.
And curiosity for what human behavior, the evolution of human behavior, and how the environment shapes our thinking to a very very large degree, but how our relationships with people, our interactions can define certain relationships. If a teacher and a student don't have a great relationship at the start of a school year, there's a lot of work that has to happen to get it to a healthy point. But even so, if that point isn't reached, we've got this fracture throughout a period of time where a young person engages with a teacher. That young person starts to think in their mental model or internal working sort of model based on work of, say, John Bowlby and others who have been long before me. They start to form a sense of themselves, a self-worth and a level of, am I of value? Does the school classroom actually accept me for who I am and for my ideas? And so the teacher plays a really big role in shaping that positive relationship where school classrooms become protective factors where we can encourage kids to be curious about learning who they are. But we live in a world, I'm sure it'll be a question we'll go to, but we live in a world where education settings, to a degree, have a very different focus on teaching and learning being separate from well-being. It should all be together.
Absolutely. And it always concerns me when I see the sometimes lack of awareness of the importance of the work that educators are doing in terms of not only educating related to subject matters. That's the nice thing to have, but it's part of an educator's role is helping to raise a human being, right? And you can't do that if you're only focusing on. I mean, it's not a matter of open head put in knowledge. If you mentioned the safety, the connection, the relationships, like these things are the critical substrate of which the seed of an individual grows. And if somebody does not feel safe, they're not going to be able to learn. If you don't feel safe and connected, your cortex, your learning brain is not going to be there to be
Right.
available to all of this. And I think that's so critical. So let's dive into the book a little bit. I've got the book open here and kind of the table of contents, but I want to kind of start in somewhere in the beginning here. Early
Yeah.
in the book, you kind of define the educational professional in the context of the book, and then you go into the kind of the state of education. And I think that's an important starting point for kind of what you're trying to do here. So I wonder if you would talk a little bit about what you're defining as the education professional, and kind of what you have seen leading to this book is kind of the state of education today, as you've seen and experienced it.
Yeah. Well, I think first of all, we often talk about teachers when we refer to schools, and there's so many more professionals in a school that are not just teachers. And so the call out to use the terminology education professional, it wasn't a bold move. I just felt that I needed to have something that captured every professional working in an education setting without saying something with 10 words. So I went with education professional. But let's be honest, there are kids that benefit from, and we have different words used in different parts of the country and globally, but we have teachers, administrators, principals or superintendents. We have different levels of people working in different ways to support the growth and development of young people. So the education professional, in the way I set this up, is saying any adult that is working in an education setting with the core mission of improving the educational pathways for young people, they're an education professional. And it just made it simple to do that. Now, teachers don't wear this weight on their own. It's not fair, it's not right, and it's not realistic. And that's why we don't have KPIs for individual teachers. You can't measure easily, did I help this child progress in their learning for everything that I did? Because teaching particularly is the sum of all that work with a young person. So,
well, and thinking about, kind of you're defining role there in that. I mean, I mean, almost any adult that comes into interactions with a child within that environment, I think, and even beyond the school environment, there's a lot of education that happens in other settings and community organizations and things like that. But I think about the role, I've heard stories and seen examples of people that are working in schools, not necessarily focused on teaching academics, but maybe they're working in the cafeteria or as part of another part of the school. Some of those people end up being really important connections for kids.
Absolutely.
And I would say are also sometimes educational professionals, although maybe not in the typical realm that people think about. But
not in the qualification of being a qualified teacher, but a young person might disclose child abuse to the cafeteria person.
That's right.
And we need that person to know where they fit in the ecosystem of the school environment to support that young person, but really just to support the mitigation to harm. I'm all about prevention, and so education professionals all play a role, but it's a shared responsibility.
Right. Well, I like that idea of kind of prevention of harm, because I think one of the things that is somewhat of a blind spot sometimes in education is the fact that educational settings, schools, are systems of care by nature. They're there to care and support and nourish and help. But there is trauma that can occur in a system of care, and we have a lot of children that do suffer from systemic trauma in schools. And of course, the work that we do around physical restraint and seclusion, a kid that is restrained or secluded in school, like that environment now has become very unsafe for a child, and it's really difficult sometimes to kind of move beyond that to be able to support a child if the environment itself, and it's not always at the hand of the educator, maybe a bully or other things that are happening, but being aware of kind of not doing harm, I think is so critical.
And I think we should unpack at some point in this chat sort of what you can do so it doesn't get to that point, because people hear us talk and hear others that share this view and say, well, we're just giving in to the kids. We're just becoming a soft society. We're just allowing kids to run rampant. Back in my day, 30, 40 years ago, you just did this and solved it. And I think we will fall into the trap in our conversations, and I'm always mindful of this, if we don't present the alternative solution, the alternative way that we can respond to behaviors of concern, human behaviors of concern, that's healthy, that keeps dignity at play, that makes sure that the young person and the teacher, the adult in the room, or the parent that's involved, that nobody walks away feeling hard done by, because we actually are in this together, and there's very clear evidence-based ways we can approach these things in much more humane ways, and develop our capacity to continue to be consistent in the way in which we want to bring consequences around, behavior that happens, that we need to sort of develop consequences around that for learning opportunities, but not strip away the learning opportunity, and understand the context of each individual. I think there's a bit of work still to be done there.
Sure. Yeah. And I want to drill into that here in just a moment. So we're going to come back to that, because I think that's a really important part of all of this. But before I do, I just want to set the stage a little bit more, kind of back to the state of education. I think it's important. And we're a community that has a lot of parents and caregivers. We have a lot of educators and administrators and, related professionals. And sometimes in all of life, sometimes people end up in camps of us versus them. And they see things in such ways that is often not really understanding the challenges that others are facing. And certainly, when you're working to support educators and working to support children, I think it's important to understand the world that we're in right now and kind of the state of education. So talk to me a little bit about, kind of, as you set the stage here in the book, what was the state of education as you're seeing it today?
Yeah, I just noticed there was this almost like an undertone of kind of frustration among different parties to what you say, right? There's the let's drive literacy numeracy. Our outcomes based on our global standards are dropping. They're not lifting. So let's bring in really strong evidence-based kind of approaches to lift that. And what I kept noticing was that we didn't do that with understanding human behavior. In fact, most things I looked at across Australian education systems, cross-sectorally, so the Catholic, the independent, and the state, in their documentation, there's a lot of great words used to describe things, but it doesn't go into the detail. For example, there's nothing about the biology of a human being, and understanding that if we've got this state of stress occurring for young people, and neuroscientists and neurobiologists talk about this, right? Understanding the impact of stress on our body and our function. But we're not noticing that in the policies that come out. What we do see is that what follows the policy is then a whole school framework, and they're usually really beautiful, illustrated well. They've got great buzzwords. But then I still meet with teachers and principals in the work I do, and they say, we've got this framework, but it's not working. And one of the things that I found in the state of education is that, have we gone to a place where we're just so intentionally excited about driving the outcomes because we measure literacy, numeracy, science, maths, but we don't really measure well-being, happiness, care, compassion, something our world needs more of right now. Like, I feel like we've created something us versus them.
Amen on that. The world altogether needs a lot more of that right now.
Yeah. Like, I mean, we say as parents, we have these values that we want to raise our children to be kind, caring, strong, affirming young individuals who can face adversity and make really healthy decisions to push through what they're facing.
Are you saying, Ben, that we don't just want to raise compliant kids?
Well, this is the thing.
That's where the focus is so often, right?
Right. It feels like what we want is obedient kids through compliance measures or punitive measures. But why can't we get kids? I don't really argue this idea of we want obedient kids. We want kids who can be self-disciplined to make really healthy decisions because of the environment they're in. And we sometimes take away from young people this idea that a 5 to 7-year-old can't make healthy decisions. That they can't in some situations, and the book kind of unpacks, potentially why. But in other situations, they actually have really great solutions to solving really complex problems for their age. And I notice we as adults sometimes take that opportunity away from them. We just go in with the quick consequence we think that teaches them, and what they learn is to be obedient because of a fear-based culture. We just don't want to call it a fear-based culture. We wrap it up.
It is what it is. I mean,
it is what it is, right? But we never do that to to ourselves. We don't hold ourselves. I think that the work around behavior support work that I see, it doesn't look at the inconsistent ways that our professionals are delivering it. So it's always focused on the young person and what we expect them to do. And if they don't do it, what the consequence is. And I just think we can do better than that. And the book is trying to bring this to the surface a little bit.
Yeah. Well, and I love the point you made in there. Because I absolutely 110% agree with you. I mean, amazing things happen when we actually collaborate with young people. Even very young kids are capable of working together and helping to develop solutions. And very often the tendency is to come up with solutions without involving the child that we're trying to work with. That's not.
And
we wouldn't work with other adults that way, and why would we work with kids that way? Just doesn't make any sense.
And it doesn't work, and we keep doing it again and again and again. But for people when they hear this as well, those that understand what we're saying and align to it, that's fine. I'm always concerned with the people that say, yeah, but then what does it look like? Do we have this anarchy? We have kids running around, story after story of trashed classrooms. And what I argue is, but there's actually ways to respond to creating an environment where the trashing of a classroom doesn't become an option, because the young person doesn't want to trash the classroom. They don't want to trash something they care about. So why is it they don't care about
or feel that they belong to or have a sense of community with?
Correct. Do you ever come into contact with a young person who says, I love my classroom and now I want to trash it? They don't. Often when I speak with young people, they say that, and I'm just going to sort of paraphrase some things I hear. This school doesn't work for me. They don't listen to me. It's interesting. In a calm tone, when kids are dysregulated, they'll say to a stranger like me coming into a school doing consulting work, they don't listen to me. I don't feel valued. I don't feel heard. They don't sit there saying, I have rights, and they're not. They never come at that angle, which I know we can report. We've got these young kids that think they have more rights. No, they actually use really healthy words for dialogue. I don't feel heard. Listen, my problems I try and raise, I don't feel comfortable.
I heard something the other day. Nobody cares about me. Nobody cares about me. Yeah, and it's heartbreaking.
It's isn't it? I have rights, and you can't do this to me. That they're not doing that. And I've seen some really interesting cases where young people they just want to be they just want to have their story heard because they've chosen the school as the environment to do it. So I'm really focused on how we create better conditions, not to manage human behavior.
I don't even like that concept of managing someone else's behavior. Behavior management, when I hear that, it gives me a little bit of a, because I want
like you're in a business managing things, isn't it? Rather than actually addressing the conditions that influence the behavior.
Well, and it feels very top down, like I'm going to control you and how you behave versus like, hey, I want to collaborate with you and work together to create the environment where you're able to thrive. And, it feels like a very different thing. A quick comment here, just in the chat. Yes, collaboration and agency are key. Absolutely agree. And just a quick reminder, if you're watching live, and I know a number of you are, you're welcome at any time to add comments, questions, whatever they may be. If you've been on this before, that I'll ask a lot of questions and won't pause. But if I see your questions pop up, I will always stop and share your questions as well. So just a reminder, feel free to do that.
Guys, shout out to some Aussies that I'm seeing, some Australians popping up with some questions.
I told you, I wasn't making this up.
Yeah.
I haven't seen any of my New Zealand folks yet. So if you're one of the New Zealand folks, please say hello as well. But yeah, we tend to get people from all over, and it's really great because when I was a kid, I would not have dreamed that we could have these, kind of a live conversation with somebody across the world, and that we can learn from each other and collaborate. And it's really fantastic. So let's dive in. And you get in by the middle of the book, you kind of talk about disruptive behavior, and you've already kind of mentioned kind of behaviors, and I'm trying to think of the language that you use, behaviors of concern. We often talk about kind of the context of a lot of behaviors, really stress behavior and stress responses, but there are perceptions. There are perceptions that a lot of behavior is intentional, and the truth of the matter is that a lot of behavior emerges because an individual doesn't have their needs met. They don't feel heard. They don't feel supported. They don't have the things that they need to thrive. So let's talk a little bit, kind of in your context of the book, about what is disruptive behavior, and then from there, I would love to have you begin to go into some of the real depth of this, which is, I know well, and I've heard and you've heard like these examples where somebody be like, okay, well, let me tell you all the things going on. What would you do? And the arms get crossed. So, take it from there if you would, and talk
Yeah,
about, a different approach to, what
yeah.
people are seeing as disruptive behavior.
Absolutely, and I think it's really great to just highlight disruption doesn't always have to be a bad thing.
Right.
So I try and bring this different way to look at it. Right, in the example of if I often say if a smoke alarm goes off right now in one of our rooms that we're in, we're out of here. We need to evacuate. Now that
The
disrupts
show
an
must go
amazing.
on, Ben. You can't leave. We've got to finish this show. So until the
Well,
flames get too close.
yeah, but see, this is the thing. You're going to blame the fire, right? But I'm going to thank the smoke alarm for saving my life. Now,
Right.
disruption in that situation is actually a really healthy thing. What I'm
Right.
trying to say in the book is what's actually the disruption? Like, what are we actually? We don't have a clear definition, first of all, for disruption. I mean, disruption in the tech world, when tech sort of boomed in schools, for example, was seen as revolutionary. We're going to have whiteboards that teachers can use that are interactive and really excel the learning. So what I argue is let's not pick and choose when we use the word disruption and label everything that is a behavior we don't understand or a behavior we dislike as disrupting the lesson. Because part of good teaching is building relationships that make kids feel like they're connected to the classroom and they want to learn what you think you can offer them, And so what I say is that in the way of disruption in schools and looking at classrooms, what upsets the flow in the teacher's judgment, and then for them to look at these three categories: intentional choice, presenting challenges, and survival related factors. And so the difference there is just in a speed dating kind of definition. It's in the book, but intentional choice acknowledges that sometimes people make choices that really is an intentional choice. Now, in the case that I want to punch my mate in the shoulder and say, "G'day, mate, how are you?" That's an intentional choice. I'm not there to hurt my mate, but it can be perceived as a disruption where teachers say you're getting physical, and at school we have rules around physical touch. So what I try and get teachers to look at is if it's an intentional choice where they're swearing at you and that they're not under any stress state, the relationship's healthy, but they're just swearing as part of their language. As well, understanding in our relationship, our dynamic, only a teacher and young person can work this out. Is that language acceptable? Is that part of it? Like, how you doing, mate? I won't swear on Facebook, right? But on this call, but when the words are used, in what context are they used? I think it's really important to understand: is it an intentional choice? Usually, we don't see a lot of intentional choice. We see a lot of presenting challenges where point in time adversity is hitting. It could be the loss of a dog, family pet, sudden passing of a close grandmother. Not enough to be traumatic, but it's still an adversity in a point in time that throws the young person through a grief and loss cycle over the next 6 months. So literally divorce we know actually is linked to adverse childhood experiences, which can be traumatic depending on where it goes. But if it's an amicable divorce, it's also a point in time presenting challenge. And we have to be mindful of that. And the third one is just the idea that real trauma exists. People that think trauma doesn't exist just don't entertain those conversations. But real trauma that exists, it takes years and decades for some people to really recover and find themselves through it. And unless we've experienced it ourselves, we should keep our mouths really carefully closed, because I think lived experience has and being someone who's talked to people with lived experience, there are things that they have worked through that I just think is incredibly deep, and it's taken some people I've met 30 years to work through something, and some of them are wonderful business leaders, some of them are teachers. But until we've really experienced it, I think we've got to be careful to form a judgment that kids should just get on with it, because some kids going through complex trauma, it's really important we understand that they need certain supports. Absolutely. So I know it's gone on a bit there, but yeah.
So I just want to interject something here real quick.
Yeah.
And I'm very aligned with kind of what you're sharing here. I often borrow from friends and colleagues like Mona Delahooke, kind of talking about kind of the idea of kind of top down behavior and bottom up or body up behavior. Kind of this idea that there's this thoughtful, intentional behavior, and there's also this kind of this stress response, this kind of bottom up or based on trauma, based on experience, based on differences in individual nervous systems, that based on having a different baseline. One of the challenges that we often see, and I'm sure you're going to agree with here, but if I'm wrong, I'll
I'll tell you.
That's all right. You'll tell me. But the assumptions often are that all behavior is intentional, and even some educators that begin to get exposed to some of this, they'll be like, "Yeah, but that one was intentional." And one of the areas that I found really impactful is kind of understanding brain development, how that occurs, the pattern in which it
Yeah.
occurs, knowing that a 5-year-old has a far lesser developed prefrontal cortex than an adult. And of
Yes.
course, thinking about the thinking, logical, rational decision making part of our brain, people often assume, though, and I've heard these time and time again, they assume, they'll take a behavior that happens and they'll assume intent behind it, when in fact it's
Yeah.
not intent. And I think that can be really harmful. We
Yeah.
often talk about assume it's a stress response. And if you're wrong, there's no harm done. But when you assume intent and you follow that pathway of assuming intent, the things that you might do following that can lead to a lot of harm. One of the
Yeah.
things I was presenting something recently, and I was making a visual, very non-scientific visual, but I was trying to show, like, when babies are born, it's all bottom up. It's all survival responses. It's all stress
Yeah.
responses. It's all keep me alive, right? And as you develop, you get more and more capacity kind of in the cortex. But even a teenager, not a fully developed prefrontal cortex, not all of that behavior you see, even though they're a teen and they might be great in academic subjects, it doesn't mean all their behavior is intentional. And as adults, I'm well past my teens, and I will have stress responses. I may have more intentional behaviors now that
Yes.
I'm able to control and kind of manage my behavior in different ways and have more ways of doing that. But I think that misunderstanding and misrepresenting other people's behavior is really impactful. So, when I say to a child, that they intended to do it, and next my mindset is a consequence, a punishment, rather than understanding. So,
Yeah.
in your experience, I mean, do you, one, do you see that? And then two, how do you kind of get people to think
Yeah.
about that and even ask the question? Because you mentioned curiosity in our talk already, and I'm a
Yeah.
big fan of curiosity, because when we're curious and we're asking questions and we're not judging, we're learning and we're getting to the root of why somebody's having difficulty. So how do you
Right.
handle that when people are making those kind of judgments? Sorry, it was a
Yeah. Well,
long-winded question, but
no,
I just
no, that's
wanted to
okay.
kind of get there.
No, that's okay. The first thing is that I also discourage anyone saying to a child, you've made an intentional choice. I mean,
Right.
how dare we make that call?
Right.
Unless we don't. I mean, a child could easily come back and say, well, you're making an intentional choice to be inefficient, inconsistent in your teaching practice. Like, let's be honest, if we really want that feedback, we should first of all welcome that. But the way I look at it is that, of course, we're well intentioned in what we do. We don't go into a teaching profession, or education professionals don't go into education settings with a view to hate every day and not like it. So I want to acknowledge that the way in which they experience pressures in any workplace that they're in also has an impact on the way they respond to what I sort of term that behavior of concern. And just quickly, behavior of concern really just means, in the judgment of the adult that's engaging with the young person, child or young person, is the behavior forming any kind of concern for me? That I'm starting and stopping in my lesson, or I can see a child getting irritable, any kind of, it doesn't mean a bad thing. Concern's not bad either. It just means, am I concerned for that young person? And I'm curious to know more to help them. So that's why I say that. And then we look at the responding to it. And some of the ways that we actually, try and sort of coach educators to look at it is, you don't need 20 different pieces of paper to build a pattern of behavior and document it. I often say to a teacher, have you got a relationship with the parent? And some will say no. Have you got a strong relationship with the child? And they'll say, well, he never or she never listens to me, or they never listen to me, right? So all of a sudden,
what relationships are? Are relationships listening? That's what I'm
Right.
getting wrong.
Right, but this is the other things I hear is, I've got a teaching degree, I should be respected. I mean, go figure. You can have 20 degrees. I don't care if you treat any person in a way where they don't feel respect is reciprocated. You have to actually look at the dynamic of your interactions. You could be a horrible person with 10 degrees, very smart but horrible to this person, and you're not hearing what they're saying. And so what I try and look at is, we try and solve these complex problems with complex solutions. And often I'll ask those two questions really just to solicit, do you have a healthy relationship with the parents? And if they say yes, I'll say, define what you think is healthy. because it's really important to understand what that relationship with the parents is like. Teachers often say, I let them know when I'm holding the child in for class or when I need work done. I'm like, do you email when the child's actually done the essay ahead of time? It never happens. See, that's the negative thinking and talk. Are we creating the condition for it to happen, and then let the parents know in advance? So that parents aren't always receiving emails or phone calls when the child's done something wrong, or when we're labeling it intentional choice. And so I often ask that, and then say, what's the dynamic you've got with your young person? Do you feel that you're relational? Do you feel they can come to you? Have you asked them? Do they feel safe in your company? Of course they're safe. I'm saying that's what you say.
Subjective, right?
Yeah. What do they think? And we have this sector where I think the great teachers don't get to speak up enough. That's what I see in Australian schools. I would like to see more great teachers that are doing this exact practice, because it's not rocket science. Right. It works. I would like to see more about that. We tend to just have headlines that's good for clickbait. And I think that's where, going back to our earlier chat, that's where there's a problem around what's helpful information around working with young people versus what's actually harmful, just absolute rubbish that we put out in media circles or in education magazines or whatever it is, different formats.
One of the things that I've seen, and I'm going to kind of ask your opinion here, but it seems like I've known and worked with educators that seem to have almost a natural ability to connect and relate and co-regulate kids. And I've met others that may not have seemed to have that natural ability, but have been able to kind of learn those skills and be intentional. And part of it really is about intention, right? I mean, maybe you're the kind of adult that really can just connect with kids and build relationships with kids, and seems to be the adult that kids will connect with automatically. But even if you're not that adult, I believe very firmly that there are strategies and there are skills that you can learn that can help you do that. And in focusing on those things, again, it's not just all about the academics, right? In focusing on those things, you can become a better, more effective educator by opening the door.
Absolutely. And actually, if someone thinks it's all about the academics, then get the academic lift and outcomes through well-being, through safety, through having young people and yourselves as the education professionals scan for threat, understand I feel good in this environment as well. Because teachers that walk in a classroom to teach that feel threat, that something's gonna happen, they're not, to your point, they're not accessing the prefrontal cortex themselves to deliver a fantastic
absolutely
lesson. They're like, where's the door? Can I put rows of tables like a traditional 1930s classroom? Not because it creates greater learning opportunity, but because it creates a barrier between me and the children. It's not inviting. I will say that rows in a room, I find that fascinating. I would actually, in a lot of the rooms I go in where great teachers are doing great things, they've actually got young people in the circles, or they've got U-shaped rooms, or they've got them standing up doing, like in the corporate world, we do business huddles. We're in this together. No problem is too big. We'll smash this out. We'll work the problem.
Well, you could also do something really radical, like get the input from the kids about how they might want to arrange.
What are you talking about, guy? No, because teaching is all about dissemination of information, right? Even though young people are saying, including our own children growing up in a modern world with a modern classroom, they'll say, "Why are we learning this?" And often I'll sort of say, "I don't actually know why. Let's find out," because they're curious. They're not connecting the why. And then when they do learn the why, they'll say, "But I don't need to know that." Right. And sometimes they're actually very much correct. Other times
you're absolutely right. I witnessed an interaction like that the other day. And, I was thinking to myself, I was actually remembering, being a kid and having somebody ask that very similar question. When am I going to use that in life? And thinking back, like, I don't know when I've actually used that in life.
It needs to be relevant.
Maybe education as a whole needs to be disrupted a little bit, but that's probably the next book.
That's
the
next book.
Yeah, that's right. Let me get myself back on topic here. And of course, you talk a bit in the book about impact of adverse childhood experiences, talk about trauma, but then you get into something I think is really critical, and I think it's critical for our audience here, and that's helping education professionals thrive in schools. And I, again, we have an audience that's made up of parents, of caregivers, of self-advocates, of teachers and professionals. But at the end of the day, I hold this belief, and kind of you're welcome to shoot my belief down if you need to, but I hold this belief that the same things that we can do to improve outcomes for children can actually improve the outcomes for our teachers and our staff and our
Yeah,
families and our communities. So when we begin to think in these directions of well-being, of safety, of connection, the ultimate, the ultimate is we're actually able to improve teacher satisfaction, reduce staff turnover, and create safer
yeah,
environments. So you tell me, based on what you have here in the book, how do we help education professionals thrive in schools? And again, you
yeah.
don't have to give it all away because we wanted to buy the book too. And of course, Courtney,
Yeah.
put up the link so people can get the book. It's a great book.
No,
But
no, that's
tell me a
good.
little bit about kind of your vision
Yeah,
for this of how,
yeah,
because this is a tough time, and we have
yeah,
a situation where there are people leaving the profession. There
yeah,
are people that are deciding not to go into education. I
yeah,
believe that education should actually be a pretty joyful and exciting profession. You are doing something of great importance, and I think with a great return. When you have,
yeah.
the students that you connect with and support, and I mean, I see teachers light up when they talk about the stories of kids that have done well. So what is it from your experience that we can do to help education professionals thrive in schools?
Yeah, sadly, depending on where your school's situated, in what country and what state, there's links to the politics of it, right? So
Yep.
without going too deep, we are in some respects, some jurisdictions are governed by the politics of the day, the government of the day.
Don't
And
start me
I
on
will.
that topic.
Right. Okay. But what I mean by that as well is that I come from this sort of school of thought. What can we influence within the realm of the square? Here we go. We've got a square here.
Yep.
What can
Yep.
we influence in the square that we are being asked to operate in? So we can't change the government of the day's decision on certain things. We can advocate that all has to happen, but those things take longer cycles to try and shift. They're longer shifts. Sorry, let me start again. There's cycles of political change that occur, and the
Yep.
shifts are often much longer in time, sort of 5 to 8 years in change management kind of research. What I sort of look at is what are the things that schools can do around their processes and their systems. So to be consistent around how we're responding to the needs within our environment. So school A, really just understanding, is doing more actually a healthy thing? Why don't we prioritize what we need to do that actually supports solving the problems we've identified with our community? I think that other things I advocate for are parent and school relationships. I am not sure if I'm seeing something uncovering here, but whenever I ask schools about the relationships with parents, you get superficial things like, oh, they're great or they're good, but then teachers are saying, I've got no time to call, I've got no time to build that. Now, I was certainly mentored in my teaching days to build relationships with parents. It makes sense. They see learning behaviors at home that can support what we see at school. So it's something I often say is build the relationships. If you're going to spend time on anything, build relationships with parents. If those parents, here's the thing that you might agree or disagree with. Here we go. If those parents are not coming to the table in a productive fashion, if they're coming in an abusive fashion, I still argue they love their children, even
Of
if they're
course.
not showing it in a respectful way. But then
Right.
we do need processes to respond to that, because it's not okay for teachers or education professionals to be met with that harsh reality.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
parents should understand
Yeah.
when their emotion is high and be
Yeah.
careful about when they're communicating things. Having said that, the other side is when parents do communicate things and schools do not want to pay attention to it,
Mhm.
you can
Mhm.
easily feel like, as a parent, that you are this small. And I
Yeah.
think when you're talking about advocating for your kids and you feel this small and you've followed the process and you've been respectful, that's damaging and that's not okay. And I do see that as well.
Yeah.
And I feel for schools and I feel for parents on both
Yeah.
sides.
Yeah.
Not an easy one to fix,
Right,
though.
right. And I mean, I think you're bringing up a great point. The one thing that I would, kind of add in my perspective is that, I think it's really critical that, as we're working to bring this knowledge to better supporting our kids and better supporting our teachers, as we're bringing the trauma awareness, as we're bringing the
Yeah,
awareness around kind of neuroscience, is that we also have a trauma informed or trauma aware approach when we're working with families.
yeah,
One of the things that breaks my heart when I hear, and I've heard this more times than I'd like to admit, is I hear an educator go, well, yeah, this kid has a terrible home, but we can't control what happens there, and
right.
they almost write off, the child. because they don't control the hours that the child is not there in school. And I would
Yeah.
contend that the hours that you have with that child could be all the difference in the world for making a better outcome for a kid. But when we kind of pass that judgment on the parents, sometimes they will come in and these are parents themselves that have experienced trauma and adversity, and we often see
Correct.
these things happening kind of through
Yeah.
through a line of families that they're kids that are coming from trauma often come from families that have had a lot of trauma. So I think
Yeah.
it's really important that we're extending those trauma informed approaches to our families and to our communities as well, because often the kids that are coming in with those experiences have kind of roots
Yeah.
and many of those parents that might come in kind of hot, for lack of a better way to put it, are parents that have not had positive interactions in the past with schools.
Right.
And as a
Yeah.
result, like, school is almost a source of trauma. There, what is it now? And
I
yeah,
absolutely agree. School-based
yep,
adversity, I kind of use that terminology a
yep,
bit for the parent and the child. Can I
yep,
touch on, kids that choose that it's better I don't go to school
mm,
because going to school is actually more harmful,
right,
and how shameful some of the commentary is around those children need tougher parenting, need
right,
more this,
right,
need attendance fines. Shame on those people. I have no issue saying this, because I think that those comments are more about not understanding what's going on for the young people,
right,
but I actually think more importantly that the parents.
right,
Again, not all parents are making intentional choices to
right,
take their
exactly.
children out of
Yep,
school.
yep,
There's tough stuff in life
yep,
globally. We've
yep,
we've
yep,
look at what we're dealing with.
yeah, yeah.
Come on,
But,
like,
but,
let's
but
be more.
what
Yeah,
helps all the way around is that curiosity you mentioned. Rather than being
right.
judgmental, approaching it from a point of curiosity and taking the same principles. I'm always a big advocate
Yeah,
that trauma awareness, for example. We don't just bring that to the students we support, but we bring it to the staff. We bring it to the administrators. We
yeah,
change the culture of our building, of our what we're doing here, because it's
yeah,
not just a matter of an ear that you're applying to help children out. It's got to be deeper than that.
yeah.
Yeah. So let's get
I
into
agree. Yeah,
let's get into, because I know that you are very much about kind of proactive, preventative, and you talk about in the book kind of preventative measures
yeah.
to adversity, kind of a framework. Would you mind talking a little bit about kind of that piece of this and kind of that idea of preventative measures?
Yeah, I mean, basically, the idea is from my days when I supported principals who had crisis situations, and you'd go into those situations always prepared with some kind of mindset, which is, what are the things that I need to do to support a very clean response to this, where there's minimal harm? So, kind of harm minimization strategy, if you want to use that kind of terminology. And the view was that, like a sports team prepares for the big game, or like a president prepares for a speech, there's things we need to do to prepare for the environment we walk into. And so the idea of preventative measure is saying, do we have the policies at a school level, right? So system to school level, that are fit for purpose for the classroom teacher. So does the teacher know when these behaviors of concern might occur, what they could do to respond to it? Not wait for the behaviors to occur, and then poor teachers are going, what do I do? Right. And so, I mean, I've tried everything, but the everything are very limited. And it's not fair to make those teachers, put those teachers in a vulnerable position either. So preventative measure sort of says, what are the things we have to put in place? A policy, a process, parent engagement sessions, a newsletter, whatever the school is needing for their community. And they need to work that out. I mean, usually I sort of work with the schools to consult around this a little bit. What are your community needs? Run a town hall, run a session that unpacks the core issues that you're facing as a community, and then put in place things that allow the impact to be reduced. Because we do know things are going to happen. And the idea is that in the moment responses, as I talk about in the book, means that we have a response in the moment that's informed by the preventative planning we did.
Mm-hmm.
So spend more time planning for the possibility of some of these things happening. So when they do happen, we've got a really clear, confident response. There's minimal harm, because things are going to happen, adversity is going to happen.
Sure.
And then the idea in the third part of that is a cycle of reflection. Actually look back and say, others will say it's like debriefing, except debriefing sometimes, depending on the school, could be everyone sits around and vents about the parent this and the child that.
Right,
So what I
right,
actually
right.
say is, with a structure, is did what we planned for support the in the moment event, and did we achieve what we set out to achieve? And if we didn't, let's actually improve, go back to the planning to improve the way in which we have to respond to adversity that hits our classrooms or our school. It's really that kind of cycle of action, if you will.
Yeah, love it. So, again, the book is Disruption in Schools, Understand Me Before You Mark Me. And of course, encourage you to check out the book. You were prompting a couple things in my head as you were saying that, and I'll get to one of them in a second. But those of you that are with us live, again, if you have a question, you have a comment, feel free to put that in the chat. Certainly encourage you. I think Courtney just put a link to the book in the chat. And of course, depending on where you are, our link may be to the US version of Amazon. If you're in Australia, just search for the book title, Disruption in Schools. So I had a thought, Ben, as you were talking, and when I have a thought, it's sometimes well, the thought was, I would love at some point. So I'm just going to throw out a future collaboration with us, but I'd love to at some point, connect with a school or a system that you've worked with through some of this, and one of the things that I think is really important is to share success stories. And I always love the idea of finding schools that have worked with folks like yourself that have kind of gone on some journeys and done some of these things, because when we can share what they're doing that has worked, it can be a model for others. So I invite you to think about that, and maybe one day you and I and a school leader of some kind can join for another conversation and talk about what those things looks like. Because when we can get that out to others that are kind of in this space, I think we can make such a tremendous.
I think that's a great. I think that's a great idea, and I think that the what things look like as well. Just again for anyone that listens to this now or later, there are non-expensive, non-onerous ways to actually respond to this. You mentioned trauma-aware or trauma-informed principles, relational principles, checking in with people, and actually noticing the behavior change or behavior of concern, and actually preventative measure, going and approaching early. I see a range of behaviours that happen between staff and kids, where I sort of sit there and go, imagine if they were aware of that behaviour before it escalated. That's the preventative piece. And it's really creating awareness in how we interact with others. So, I know it sounds more complicated in brain and body science, but it's really powerful. And to your point, we don't spend enough time understanding, which we're starting to now, the biology of the body, our stress responses, and how to work with that in situations of our classrooms.
Yeah. I've been presenting a lot on a topic, and to give credit where credit due, kind of sharing, this idea that I think Stuart Shanker was the first one I had heard really kind of put it this way, but behavior is biology. People say behavior is communication. I go, yeah, of course, but behavior is biology. When you really look at human behavior through that lens and realize, like, it's not a simple matter of intent. There's a whole lot that's going on in our brain and our nervous systems. There's hormones, there's neurotransmitters, there's past experiences, there's all of these things that affect behavior, and it's more complex. It's not just a matter of, okay, let's judge this to be intentional, and now we need to have a reward or a consequence to somehow manipulate and get the behavior we want to see. We really need to see it. And you were mentioning a moment ago, kind of this idea, I think when people, any of us, children, you, I, whoever it may be, when people feel seen and heard and valued, right there, you are preventing an escalation that might lead to a big behavior. Just seeing and connecting. And it's so important. And the value of authentic connection. And I always use that word authentic because, I know in the families that we work with and the individuals we support, we have a lot of neurodivergent individuals, and they will not be fooled by a pretend relationship, and those authentic connections, though, can mean so much in supporting any other human being. And it's not as hard as it seems, and it's not something you don't have time for either. I would argue the opposite, that you don't have time not to, because when you're not doing those things, that's when you're more likely to be spending a lot more time working through disruptions and other things that have made it more difficult for you.
And this is probably spot on. This is why I'm also a fan of this idea of looping, which has happened in some parts of the world, like in terms of a classroom teacher stays with the class for 2 or 3 years in primary school settings or early years. So, and most of the research I've been investigating around this, actually, the reason that it's not being picked up is because teachers have described in the surveys they don't want to stay in a particular class. They don't. What if the relationship's not positive with a particular child? They've got to endure it for 3 years or 2. So the strategy itself of looping and having the teacher move up with the same cohort isn't actually a negative. It's the interpretation by us as human beings. If we can show the power of actually of this actually being quite good, the reality is that we're seeing some data say that about a month in year 2 and year 3 of a 3-year sort of looping experience is brought back in time. We're not reestablishing relationships. Kids have to prove themselves to their teacher every year. Teachers don't. Teachers don't prove themselves to kids. They're teachers, right? Kids expect teachers to be kind, caring, because that's what we are. So I think we're creating some hardship in some of our structural pieces here, which is the areas that I'm really passionate about looking at as well. Another conversation maybe.
No, absolutely. I love it. So I actually have some experience around this that's personal. And that is that my son was in a setting when he was fairly young where, and of course I didn't know that I haven't heard that terminology before, looping terminology in this context before, but my son was in a situation where he actually had the same educator for about 2.5 years. And wow, I mean, this was an amazing educator who understood my son in such a way that she was his person, she was his support. And I'll tell you, I mean, I can see this being beneficial to any child, but I know very well that a lot of our children, a lot of our kids that have individual education plans, and a lot of our kids with disabilities and the neurodivergent children, this kind of support could be game changing for them.
It could, right? It could. But guess what it relies on, Guy? It relies on the teacher that your son had. It relies on us making sure we've got those teachers. So the book also talks to policy. In the back of the book, it sort of spits a little bit out around policy and change. And here's the advocacy piece. We have shortages globally, right? In many professions. Can we also just be honest and say it's not just teaching? We talk about teaching a lot, education a lot, but there's shortages in other sectors. There's also evidence and research being popped out every day saying the shortage may not be as bad. Sometimes I'll be honest, I'm trying to keep up with some of the new reports around this because we don't always, we report some contradictory things. The principle is the same though, right? If we have the right people in the job, then these strategies, they work well. But we are in a human services profession, people profession, and we have to rely on our principals, our school leaders, to actually work through the capable and the maybe not so capable components of the job. And with respect, there are people doing the job right now that just want to finish up and move on, and that's there's different reasons for that. And there's others that have just started their career, and in some of the people I meet, they're wondering, is it for me? So if we don't have clear passion and purpose and systems and structures to give 40, 50-year careers to people to do some amazing work, we've got to do something differently around why we're not seeing people say, I'm in this, I want to be in this. And we just got to highlight the great teachers where things are working, where the trauma-aware practice is part of who they are. It's not this standalone piece, because the principles of trauma-aware practice, for example, and the work out of Judith Howard and the QUT team, they would advocate that that's for everybody. Being empathetic and compassionate and caring is for every child to benefit from.
Absolutely. Every human benefits from that, right?
Yeah.
So a question for you, kind of, and again, we all look at this from wherever we may be in our experiences, but here in the United States, I've often said things that related to our higher education system, that our higher education system, in my opinion, often runs 10 to 20 years behind. And as a result, our educators coming out of teaching programs today, most of them are not getting awareness around trauma, awareness around, kind of neuroscience as it relates to learning, which I think is a huge deficit. So, educators come in, but they're still learning a lot of classical behaviorism, a lot of approaches that I think are dated. And is that any different in Australia? Or is higher ed doing maybe a better job than we're doing over here.
I'm not as qualified to compare, but I can say that, you know, Queensland University of Technology in Queensland, Australia, have embedded trauma-aware practice in their Bachelor of Education, their early childhood degrees, and their grad certs and masters. There was a recent announcement around Deakin University in Melbourne, led there with Tom Brunzell, and the work around trauma-aware practice being part of the four they're running that out now, I think, in a mandated way for their Bachelor of Education. I would say, though, to your comment here, though, students graduates need to fill out the feedback forms to their unis if there's an opportunity, if that's the structure, I guess, for what they're missing out on. You know, in our sessions when we go into schools as part of our prac, if we're recognizing there's a gap in what we're learning in university to what we're seeing in the schools, we've got to get that information back to the universities. Is that happening? I'm not sure. Is it happening enough? I'm not sure.
And sometimes I think people don't know what they're missing, you know, because this is what they've been presented. I mean, certainly we've got some, you know, there's some great programs over here as well. You know, I think about Lori Desautel's, who has a program at Butler in applied educational neuroscience. There's some great programs, but as a whole, it's not really, many of these things are not part of your average teaching program. And of course, there's many colleges and universities across the country here. And you know, there's some positive signs, but I think there's still a pretty big gap. So a lot of people aren't getting some of this information. And, you know, we have a lot of educators in our community, and, you know, we were doing things like book studies and all of those things to try to get some of that out there. And there's definitely people that are hungry for that. But, you know, I think we need to do a better job.
Like, some people don't believe in it. You know, that's freedom to believe in what and be curious about what we choose. And and that's why there exists not just us, but many people advocating for a worldview on these things. Because at the end of the day, no one wants to bring about harm in a school setting to children, but we know that harmful things can happen, and otherwise we wouldn't be sitting here talking about it and reporting it. Your work, by the way, is really incredible in what you're trying to achieve in terms of raising awareness for. I see the things you and the team are putting out to the world around the awareness around things happening in schools, harmful practices, court decisions. I see a lot of the things you are putting out to the world, and what it's doing is actually, I believe strongly, it's actually creating a better worldview that these things are happening, because we can live under a rock if it's too distanced from our own little bubble. And I'm actually really grateful to be connected to you. I'm sad that we have these things happening in some parts of the world. If can't speak to all parts, you know, but some parts of the world, it blows my mind that some things are still happening the way that they're being reported.
Well, I mean, the acknowledgement that in 17 states here in the United States, it is perfectly legal to hit a child in the name of school discipline. Corporal punishment is allowed here in the United States. I mean, it blows my mind. And you know, of course, you know, I hope that you know, part of our message is not about shame or blame or just pointing out these issues to raise you know, anger. It's really about, and there's solutions, and there's better things we can do that improve outcomes for everyone. And I think that's so important to this. Can I
say on that guy as well, though? Like, how would someone in that situation, maybe it's a separate sort of thing to look into as well together, but how do people that are then doing it, if they're doing it in their schools in the United States, how do they go home and how do they feel about this? That is not they might not be doing it, but they know that it's there if they need to do it. I just would be very interested in understanding the mindset, because in teaching, we're in a helping profession. It's not normal in a helping profession to inflict harm. So
well, you know, but when people begin to believe that they have to do something, you know, so, you know, if you don't know this about me already, Ben, one of my least favorite words is compliance. I hate the word compliance because we often are so focused on making people comply and do things that we cause a lot of harm through that. And I actually still think that much of our education system is based on compliance. And as a result of that, many adults today kind of went to schools that were compliance based, were raised in families that were compliance based, And sometimes we find ourselves when we're in a situation, for instance, someone in authority tells us this is what we need to do when this happens. As people that were raised in compliance-based ideology, we comply. Now, I like to consider myself a little bit of a disruptor here,
Yeah.
and I ask questions. Like I go to a doctor's office, and a doctor tells me X, Y, Z. A lot of people just go, "Okay, well, you're the doctor, you're the person in authority." I ask
Yeah.
lots of questions. I want to understand why. And we don't
You're
always reward
curious
that.
guy.
We don't always right. We don't always reward curiosity, though.
No.
And what I would say to you is, Ben, I think the reason that a young teacher, never necessarily in the education program that they go through, learns about some of the big behaviors that they might see, some of the big baffling behaviors that they might see when they get into a classroom. They get into their first teaching job. They see this real, this really big behavior, and maybe it's a young child with a disability that is having kind of a really big behavior, and they're concerned. They ask what to do. They're told that, oh well, in this case we might restrain a child, or in this case we might do something else. And initially that educator might go, oh, I don't really like the way that feels, or maybe. But
Yeah.
when someone in authority is telling you to do something, sometimes people find themselves doing it. And I think that, I would say that it's culture, it's training, and it's compliance that sometimes leads people to. And again, I've heard the narratives. It's like, well, we don't like doing it, but we have to do it.
Do
People have
you
been
know
led
though,
to believe
Guy?
it's necessary.
Yeah, do you know, on that topic of what you're saying, there is more research coming out as well. Some like seriously great people in academia, by the way.
That are prove me totally wrong.
No. They're actually saying moral injury. It's terms
Yeah.
that I've sort of become more familiar with
Okay.
now, meaning
Okay.
that we're sort of operating in a way where, to your point, we're being asked to operate based on
Right.
authority and complying with the
Right.
working conditions we think we
Right.
need to comply with, or
Right.
by position description we're required to comply with. But it's against our morals and our values.
Right.
And so I guess why I raise that is because there are always healthy ways to look at things. There's also always unhealthy ways to look at things. I think it's really critical that we breathe more as people and sort of say, hey, what's the actual situation, and how do we challenge ourselves to solve this when no one gets hurt and no one feels marginalized? And that, I agree, takes time if we haven't set up the relationships that are so powerful. And I would argue that good teaching starts with building. I argue what a lot of people argue, right? Good teaching starts with healthy relationships and reciprocal trust and safety. They're not buzzwords. That's what it means to be human. A child that cries will often ask for their primary caregiver because they make them feel safe. Biological need, to your point.
Right.
So
And that curiosity that you mentioned, right?
Right.
I don't care who you are or what profession you're in.
Yep.
The moment you lose your curiosity about what you're doing, you've kind of ended your career. I've run into people and educators, no exception here, that well, we've done everything, we know everything, and you're not continuing that curiosity. And I'm a big believer, kind of every presentation I ever give, that Maya Angelou quote comes up, do the best you can until you know better, then when you know better, do better. This is about the journey. Your book is about the journey. And when we go on that journey, when we continue to be curious, when we continue to kind of move in this direction, I think there's that opportunity to continue to do better. And even acknowledging, like, what I think I know today, in 5 years, I'm going to read your book, and I'm going to, learn all these other things, and I'm going to still be able to do better. It's continuing down that pathway, I think, is so critical.
A really fantastic thing a mentor in the business world said to me is emergent learning. Never knew those two words, but the idea that emergent learning and learning is emergent. We should be on a continuous evolution of learning things, not with the pressure of, oh my gosh, I don't know enough, more with the curiosity to engage in knowledge and content and people to do better.
Absolutely.
But we live in a very interesting world where we want things very quickly. We want things even at a superficial level, and we generalizing, of course, and we don't look deep enough because that takes time. And we think that that's not part of our job, or that's not. I just look at it really in simple terms. If we choose to work with young people, we take everything that comes with it. And the best way to not be legally responsible for the things that parents are is to build that relationship, so that parents manage that part, which is fine. We manage the education part, which is fine. And then it can work. It can work really well. No us and against them. No blame. It doesn't need to be.
I'm with you. I'm with you, my friend.
Yeah.
Another comment here.
Moral injury. Yes.
Is doing some great stuff. Also, inclusive educational practice. And then here a link to an article. We'll try to get that in the chat as well.
Yeah.
About kind of what we're talking here about moral injury. Thanks for sharing that. So we have actually reached and exceeded our time here. So we've kind of reached the end of our time. I think we could keep talking for another hour or two easily, though. So we'll have to have some more conversation. I really appreciate you joining me today to talk about the book. And again, remind people the book is now available. You can get it on Amazon and through other booksellers as well. So definitely, check it out. Disruption in Schools, Understand Me Before You Mark Me. Definitely recommend that you check it out. There's a lot of really valuable information here. I want to give you, Ben, an opportunity. Again, I want to thank you, but an opportunity for any last or final thoughts you want to share with us, as we're wrapping up here today.
Yeah, I think unlike probably most people, I'm not interested in me in this moment. I want to thank you. I want to thank you for the work you're doing, the platform you're providing and creating. And I just think the more that we connect, look at technology connecting us and doing great work in whatever part of the world we're in. I just think really, really grateful to have connected with you. I mean, thank Joe Brummer. Thank Joe Brummer, wearing your t-shirt.
Joe is often on here. He's not on here today, but it's not unusual to see Joe pop in. So, maybe he'll check out this episode. In fact, I'll text him and say, we were talking about you, Joe. So I'm sure he'll check it out. Joe's one of those curious people that's always like digging in and learning new stuff.
That's it. But look, people can track me down like they can track you down. I think we put enough out there. They can Google our names or look us up on the website. So I'm just really, really privileged to have this chat and unpack some of these ideas with you, Guy. Appreciate it.
Yeah, likewise. Since I've been doing the podcast here at the Alliance, it's been such a incredible learning journey for me to have the opportunity to sit across from people like you and so many others that are doing a lot of incredible work. And I really appreciate you. Maybe at some point I'll get out there to Australia and have a chance to meet you in person. The only problem is right now, I think if I go, I might not come back because, I won't go into that. But anyway, Ben, thank you so much. I'm going to ask you to stick around for a second. We're going to say goodbye to everybody else here that has been joining us. And again, we just want to remind people, if you were watching this today, share it with a friend, share it with a colleague. When we begin to get this information out there to more people, we affect a greater level of change. So, share about this book, get a copy yourself. We'll have to, we're getting ready to put out the schedule for next year's book study, but we'll have to look at getting it in one of our book studies here at one point as well. So thank you so much, Ben. Want to say goodbye to everybody, and I'll see you in just a moment. Thanks again for joining us here, and we will see you again.